Translation. The Lord placed the earth within his sight on the surface of the water and transferred to her his own energy in the form of the ability to float on the water. While the enemy stood looking on, Brahmā, the creator of the universe, extolled the Lord, and the other demigods rained flowers on him. Okay, so purport by Srila Prabhupada. Yeah, if there's any problems, please let me know in the chat. I'll try and just glance at it from time to time. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Those who are demons cannot understand how the Supreme Personality of Godhead floated the earth on water. But to the devotees of the Lord, this is not a very wonderful act. Not only the earth, but many, many millions of planets are floating in the air, and this floating power is endowed upon them by the Lord. There is no other possible explanation. The materialists can explain that the planets are floating by the law of gravity, but the law of gravitation works under the control or direction of the Supreme Lord. That is the version of Bhagavad Gita which confirms, by the Lord's statement, that behind the material laws, or nature's laws, and behind the growth, maintenance, production, and evolution of all the planetary systems, behind everything is the Lord's direction. The Lord's activities could be appreciated only by the demigods, headed by Brahmā, and therefore, when they saw the uncommon prowess of the Lord in keeping the earth on the surface of the water, they showered flowers on him in appreciation of his transcendental activity. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sagam Udastat Shalilashya Gochare Vinyasya Tas Yam Abadat Swasatyam Adishtuto Vishvashuja Prashunayar Apuryamano Vibudai Prashanto Rehe Prashanto. I'm sorry, Pashato. Not Prashanto. That'd be something different. So this verse is telling us that the Lord, in the form of Varaha, he took the earth, which had fallen down in the Garbhodak ocean, on the tip of his tusk, and he raised it to the top of the water. He placed it on top of the water and then kept it within his view. You know, just like a parent. If the kids are playing or something, then he's going to, he or she will protect the children, so they always keep them within their sight. So, Shalayalasha Gochare, on the water just within the Lord's sight. And then it says that after the Lord placed the earth on top of the water, he invested the earth with his personal energy so that it could float on top of the water. And then seeing this, the demigods, specifically the Prajapatis, and then the head of all the Prajapatis, the creator of the universe, Lord Brahmā, started to glorify the activities of the Lord, and then the Prajapatis were showering flowers upon the Lord, seeing his uncommon activities. This was all going on while the demon was looking on, which shows their contempt, their disregard for Hiranyaksha. So this description about the Lord raising the earth on the tip of his tusk and then floating on the top of the Garbhodak ocean. Well, educated, rational people, even with a little bit of scientific knowledge of the world, would never accept this description. Unless, of course, devotees accept very easily, but for those that are exposed to scientific modern understanding, they would not accept. Certainly atheists would scoff at such a description. Like it's given here, it says, Adadat Sva Satyam, which means that the Lord invested his personal energy in the earth, and because of that, the earth was able to float on the water. Now, we know for the last 400 years that since the time of Isaac Newton, that the law of gravity is the cause of the earth floating in space. At least that's what we've learned from our upbringing. But in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 9th chapter, Krishna says, Maya adakshena prakriti, that he is the superintendent, the creator, and the manipulator of material nature, personally. It's his energy, he created, and he guides it, and he can manipulate it. Now, scientific people, or let's just say anyone in this material world actually, we can observe, but especially scientifically minded people, they can observe the natural laws, such as gravity, and they can observe how it acts. So it's given a name, gravity. You can measure it, and you can utilize it, but it has to be operated or utilized within the laws of material nature. So the question is who is the maker of the laws? So here in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 10, Krishna says that he is the one that makes the laws and can manipulate the laws. So let's investigate this premise and see if it's plausible. Again, I'm showing a PowerPoint, so I hope that the slides that I'm showing will be helpful. So we're going to do a little experiment. If you happen to be in your kitchen, you can try and find one potato and lift it in your hand, in the palm of your hand. So if you have a potato handy, or you can just imagine this, potato's not real heavy. You hold it in, it's small enough you can hold it in the palm of your hand. I want you to concentrate on that potato, and by your own power, like a Jedi Knight, I want you to levitate that potato into the air. Now, there are some yogis that can levitate themselves and different objects, so it is possible. So if you can concentrate and by your own will try and make that potato lift into the air, float. So, scientifically minded people will say, so what does this prove? Obviously, no, we can't do this. Scientists, Mayavadis also, both say that either God does not exist, or many of them say, or that we ourselves, we can become God. We're trying to become the supreme being ourselves. But if we cannot invest a potato with the potency to float in the air, then how can we claim to be God or as great as God? In this verse, again, it says, Adadat Sva Satyam. Adadat Sva Satyam means he invested the earth with his own potency so that it was able to float. So what this proves is that, just like Krishna says, adakshena, the material nature is acting within his control. It proves that we cannot control material nature. We can only observe it. We can see how it works most of the time, and therefore we can utilize the natural laws for our own purposes, but we cannot actually control them. We can only utilize them. It's just like a potter. A potter, he didn't create the clay. He can create the pot, but he can't create the clay. Similarly, all the laws of material nature, all the ingredients of material nature are there. We can manipulate them for our own purposes, but it has to be within the laws of material nature. We cannot go beyond the laws of material nature. We cannot create them, and actually, we cannot manipulate them beyond the laws. So this verse claims that Lord Varaha, he lifted, not only lifted, but he also floated the earth on the surface of the water. So the earth is very, very heavy. Is this feasible? So to understand this, we should, first of all, we can have a simple understanding of the gravitational pull. So the way you do that is you first have to calculate the mass of an object. So, whoops, I went the wrong way. Here we go. Here's the Earth. And then here's a formula that was calculated by Isaac Newton 400 years ago. And this is how you can actually calculate up to the dimension and the weight of planets, their gravitational pull. Now, I can't pretend to understand this, but it does work. And as a matter of fact, the calculation is estimated that the Earth weighs 5.972 sextillion. That is 1,000 trillion metric tons. That is a lot of zeros. What that means is you've got 21 zeros basically behind a 6. Just a unestimable number. I mean, you can see the number, you can talk about the number, but to really conceive what that number is actually quite difficult, the weight of the Earth. So, in order to bring that down to our level, to give us some sort of comparison, everybody knows I love doing this kind of stuff. Continuing on with our analogy about the potato, if we have a bag, a 10-pound bag of potatoes, you know you can carry it still in one hand. It's a little heavy, but you can carry it in one hand. If you have a 20-pound bag of potatoes, that's a little bit heavier. You'd probably have to put it on one shoulder. What if you had 10 20-pound bags of potatoes? That would be 200 pounds of potatoes. You would have to stick that in a shopping cart, and it would be probably pretty heavy. Now, what if you took 100 20-pound bags of potatoes? That would equal 1 ton, 2,000 pounds, and you would definitely need some sort of a truck in order to achieve that, to pull it around. You know that a human being can't lift a ton of potatoes. Well, actually, it's not true, because back in 1956, a fellow by the name of Paul Anderson, he made the world's record by lifting 6,270 pounds by backlifting it. He weighs, at that time, he weighed 360 pounds. So that means that he lifted almost 18 times his body weight, basically 6,000 pounds. That means he was able to lift not 200 bags, 20-pound bags of potatoes, but rather 320-pound bags of potatoes, 6,000 pounds. I mean, pretty darn impressive, wouldn't you say? Just one second. But then again, it's not really all that impressive. You know what's more impressive than that is 18 times your body weight. That's impressive, but a common worker ant that you find in the field anywhere, this ant can withstand 5,000 times greater its own body weight. Just phenomenal. Now that's impressive. So to put that in some sort of perspective, if we were Paul Anderson, but we had the strength of an ant, that would mean that we could lift 1.5 million pounds. In other words, that's 8 tons. An elephant, for instance, weighs 8 tons. If you could lift 100 elephants, you would have the strength of an ant. Another perspective would be a diesel locomotive. It weighs 100 tons. If you were able to stack 8 diesel locomotives on top of each other, you could bench lift that much. If you had the strength of an ant, Of course, that's a far cry from being able to lift the earth, but still pretty impressive. So to put this in, again, into some sort of perspective that we can understand, as I said, you can look at the chart here if you're looking at this. The earth, again, is 5.9 such and such sextillion, which is basically 6,000 trillion metric tons heavy. So if you had the power of an ant, you could lift 800 tons. So 800 divided into that 6,000 trillion would come out to be a number with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so 24. 7 with 24 zeros. Still such a large number, it's hard to imagine. Anyway, 7 with 24 zeros behind it, sets of 8 locomotives. Still, to try and understand what that means, that big number, is if you took a locomotive is about 16 feet tall. If you stacked 8 of them on top of each other, it would be 128 feet tall. So if you divide that 7 with 24 numbers, zeros behind it, by 128, it turns out to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it would be 58 with 15 zeros behind it, feet into the air. Still kind of hard to understand that kind of a number. It doesn't mean much to us. But if you figure that there is 5,280 feet in a mile, then you can divide that number, and then it turns out that if you could stack locomotives 8 or 11 trillion miles high into the sky, and you could lift it, then you could lift the earth. That's how heavy the earth is. Now, of course, demons won't believe that God is the cause of lifting the earth, what to speak of making the earth float. No, it's just laws of gravity. It just happens that way. But devotees, they understand that this is the Lord's energy that is allowing this fantastically heavy object to be lifted within space. We cannot even make a potato float in the air, but the Lord makes this earth float effortlessly in space. So that's a wonderful act. But then again, when you think about it, it's not really wonderful, because the Lord floats millions and millions of planets effortlessly in space, not just this one Earth, which is very, very tiny compared to other planets. So I've shown this slide before many times. How many planets are there? Well, there's this Hubble telescope, and by looking into the Hubble telescope, it's estimated that there are 6 sextillion planets. So the way that's calculated, that's how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 6 with 21 zeros behind it. The way that's calculated is that it's estimated that there's 300 million planets, they say stars, planets, stars, whatever, in a galaxy, and there's, if you point your telescope, your Hubble telescope, in any one direction for a couple of weeks, this picture will come out, and it's estimated that there's 10,000 galaxies in this one little picture, with this one angle of the telescope. And in the sphere, where they can point the telescope, there's 2 million different angles in a sphere. So if you take those 2 million arc minutes multiplied by 10,000 galaxies, multiplied by 300 million planets or stars in each one of the galaxies, then it comes out to be 6 with 21 zeros behind it, 6 sextillion. So millions and millions and trillions of planets are out there, and all of them are floating effortlessly in space. So for a devotee of the Lord, even the Lord lifting the earth and then having it float on top of the water of the Garbhodak ocean is not particularly wonderful, because everything he does is wonderful. Now, But scientists, they can float all kinds of objects in the air. You know, we have airplanes and rockets and missiles within the last 100 years. However, most of those things that we just mentioned, they are heavy objects in themselves, and they need some sort of propulsion to keep them afloat. And as soon as there's no fuel left, then they're going to fall, unless there's something like a satellite, which is beyond the Earth's atmospheric pull. But we can take the example just like a balloon. You know, there's these high altitude balloons, but just a regular helium balloon, because the helium is lighter than air, it does float. So you can take a rubber ball inside the pool and you try and push it down, and it's just pop, it'll pop right to the surface of the water. So just like that helium, it rises because it's lighter than air, and air is lighter than water, so that's why it goes to the top. So that's the principle of buoyancy. It's not anything mystical. And this is all caused by gravity. So our question is, so what is gravity? Well, gravity, we learn, is the attraction and repulsion of different negative and positively charged particles based on their atomic weight. But then we can ask, but why is it that there's negatively and positively charged particles, and why do they have a certain weight? You know, just keep on asking why? How did this come about, and why does it act the way it does? And the answer will ultimately be, by a materialist, is that nothing caused it, it's just the way it is. However, we want to emphasize that a scientist, no matter how great he is, cannot change the laws of material nature. They cannot create and cannot change the laws of material nature. We limited beings, we can only observe the laws of nature and then utilize them to exploit the resources of material nature. So I know that's kind of a little bit of a shorter class than most people like to give, but to summarize the simple points that I was trying to make is that in this verse it says that Lord Varaha picked up the earth at the edge of his tusks and put the earth on the top of the earth where he could see and take care of it, and then invested the earth with his own potency, while the demigods, headed by Lord Brahmā, praised him and rained flowers on him despite the demon looking on. So the Lord, this shows that the Lord controls the laws of material nature. We can only observe them and utilize the natural laws. And in order to give an example of this, what I said was that we cannot even float a potato in the air by our own will. By our desire alone, we can't even float a potato into the air. What to speak of floating the earth? So how great is the Lord that, what to speak of this earth? He can float trillions of planets, but just this earth is estimated to be 6,000 trillion tons. And to give a perspective, I said if you took a 10-pound bag of potatoes, you can lift it in one hand. 20-pound bag of potatoes, you probably have to put it on your shoulder. 200 pounds of potatoes, you're going to definitely need a shopping basket. 2,000 pounds of potatoes, you're going to need a truck, unless you're somebody like Paul Anderson, who can lift 18 times his body weight, which is equal to 320-pound bags of potatoes. But that is nothing compared to an ant that can lift 5,000 times its body weight. And if we had that kind of strength, we could lift 1.5 million pounds, which is equivalent to lifting, bench pressing 100 elephants or 8 locomotives stacked on top of each other. But even that is nothing compared to lifting the earth, because the earth would require you to lift 11 trillion, or locomotives that would rise 11 trillion miles high into the air. That's how heavy the earth is. So it is not wonderful that the Lord can lift the earth and make it float effortlessly, because he's making estimated 6 sextillion planets float already in space effortlessly. So the scientists can claim to have found all kinds of scientific discoveries. So now we have airplanes and rockets, etc., that can float in the air. However, those are following the natural laws, and they cannot float by our own will. Only the Lord can do that, simply by his desire, parasha shaktir vividaya shruyate, swabhaviki jnana bala kriya cha. So if you say that that's just how things work, we have to ask, how do the laws such as gravity work? Why does nature act in a certain way? Because we cannot even will a potato to float in the air, but the Lord can. Therefore, in this verse, it says, Abhistat Pashunai and Apuryamana. Puryamana means they were very satisfied, and therefore they rained flowers and praised the Lord, while Pashata Arehe, the demon, looked on and they simply neglected him. So similarly, we neglect the demon atheists and materialist scientists and Mayavadis who try to say that they are equal to, greater than the Lord. The Lord doesn't exist, doesn't have potencies. So that's what I wanted to relate. I am going to unmute everyone. Let's see. I've unmuted everybody. Okay, so that's it. And I just want to remind you that there's no reason why we can't end on time today. If anyone has any questions or comments, please go ahead.
I'll ask a very esoteric question. Ram, very nice class. Well, you gave really vivid examples of strength. Very well done. So you were describing how what Krishna is doing, the fact that our planet is floating, isn't, for Krishna, it's not wonderful. And in fact, Krishna confirms that in the Bhagavad Gita when he's describing about everything in this whole cosmos. He says, Ekang Shena Stato Jagat. It's just like an atomic fraction of his splendor. It's so tiny. Well, my question is then, if these things aren't wonderful, what is wonderful? What does Krishna do that is wonderful? What can fall into the category we say, now that is wonderful?
Oh, I don't know.
There's an esoteric question for you.
Well, I kind of did think of that, by the way. I did think of that. I was going to think that the description, the nectar of devotion, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where it says that Krishna has the 4 qualities, they have to do with his beauty, his sweetness, his relationship with the devotees. Those are super excellent qualities. That's one way to say it. But another way you can say nothing is wonderful for Krishna because of the way Srila Prabhupada is using the word wonderful. In other words, he is capable of doing anything. So even if we talk about floating all the planets, unlimited planets within the universe, you start thinking about how many universes are there coming out of the body of Mahavishnu. They're just coming like atoms out of his skin pore. So what is wonderful? Nothing. He is capable of doing anything. So those 2 ways. One is his super excellent qualities are wonderful, that no one else possesses, even his expansions. And then again, nothing is wonderful because he's capable of doing everything that is beyond our conception. That's the best I can do with that one.
Yeah, I could throw my 2 cents into that. Is that in terms of what is really wonderful? I would say what's really wonderful about Krishna is the love that he expresses and exchanges with his devotees. That's probably the most wonderful thing about Krishna. I think that in the spiritual world, probably no one's that impressed with, the fact he's a great flute player and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's what's really the most wonderful thing is Krishna's love. He's the love of everyone's soul, of everyone's being. He's the ultimate love, which we probably see as the most wonderful. For example, say Barack Obama, his kids probably aren't that impressed with the fact that he's the president of the United States or he has this power or that power. What's most wonderful about him is that he's daddy. Anyway, very nice class.
Yeah, that's a nice point. Very safe.
When Prabhupada was giving us the Krishna book, he gave us chapter 26, was a whole chapter called Wonderful Krishna.
I was thinking that, and I didn't remember that much about the chapter. Say something about that, Madan.
No, it was just, they started off with, as you're pointing out, was Govardhan Puja, Giri Govardhana, Krishna lifted the hill. So, everything that Krishna did was wonderful. That's another point. Of course, the Buddhists say there's nothing wonderful. Nothing is wonderful. But that's because that's kind of a joke on the word nothing. They're very much exclusive.
That's funny.
Yeah, they're really good to make jokes about, because they'll say, nothing is independent of God, so therefore it's independent. Nothing is superior to God, therefore nothing is superior. So of course they would say nothing's wonderful. But for a devotee, they see everything that Krishna does is wonderful. You can relish anything that he does. So it's just a play on the words for the relishing Krishna for what he is. Even that his name is wonderful. Just think about Krishna's name. We do that every day, quite a bit. Krishna's name, how wonderful his name is.
Balabhadra, somebody just put in a chat something that's pretty cool. Said what's wonderful is that he runs in fear for Mother Yasoda, and he's God. That's pretty wonderful. Allows himself to be controlled by his devotees. Yeah, so you go on and on. And that's a great point, Madan. Yeah, for a devotee, everything, just like a parent, even whatever their child does, they just see it as wonderful. Especially a little baby. It's just how they sneeze, how they crawl, everything about them is just wonderful.
Of course, the Srimad Bhagavatam, that's certainly wonderful.
That's true.
Because the third verse, it says that how do you appreciate something that's so wonderful as you just relish it? And relish is a kind of an interesting meditation on what relish is, because we use a lot of relish in Krishna consciousness. That you're relishing pure devotion, your mind, the spiritual master relishes that. He relishes Krishna's pastimes at every moment, anxious to have this. So this, if you start to analyze what relish, that's wonderful that we have the capacity. Krishna gives us the capacity through the spiritual master, even though we're in condition of life, to be able to relish Krishna consciousness.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the word is translated as relish in the third verse of the Bhagavatam?
In the third verse of the Bhagavatam.
Yeah, it's old stuff.
I should know that.
What's the first?
I can't. If he started,
what's the first word of the first? What's the first word of the third verse?
All right. You need a running start, I call it. Yeah, I can look it up.
Something Rustica Babica.
Yeah,
Can't remember.
we always say in the Gurvasika that the spiritual master is always relishing.
Rustica Bhuvi Babica. Can't remember the rest.
Hare Krishna.
While you're looking that up, Ramananda, I just wanted to say that really was a good class, and you always give a good class, a good scientific class.
Nigama kalpa tarol galisam palam. That's what the verse is.
Ram, is an insect the strongest of all the beings that we know of in terms of its body weight?
Wow, there's a big echo. I think it comes from Balabhadra.
Yeah, it is. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm lowering my volume.
As far as I know,
Does
yeah,
that help
insects are. Yeah, I think so. That's what it was. As far as I know, yeah, insects are like the strongest guy. You know, just like you look at an ant. I mean, it's born with armor. It's just armor and muscle.
Your armor, but where's the muscle? Where's all the strength? I don't. You know, us humans, you get these big bulging muscles. That guy you were showing that was lifting that incredible amount of weight equivalent to X amount of potatoes. There's muscles bulging everywhere. Insects are skinny little. They're tiny, skinny little guys. You don't even see any muscle there.
Well, I guess that's Svasatvam. Krishna invests them with power.
Well, how about when you've been in India and you were taking a train and you get these little skinny guys carrying bags for you? This one guy, he carried 6 bags. I'm looking at him. He built, I guess, quite similar to an ant. He had little skinny arms. And I didn't know how. I mean, I was struggling with one of the bags, and he had all 6 of them. He didn't have any muscle mass, so it was quite astonishing to me how he did that without any muscles. Did you ever notice those guys? I think they call them coolies, is it? The guys that help you at the train station?
I don't remember them, but I'll certainly, if and whenever I go back to India, I'll definitely notice. I don't remember them.
Well, they weren't big, bulky muscle guys. They were really. Because I was thinking, how does he do that? Yeah.
You know, in the Mahabharata, there's descriptions of, and there's a brief reference to this in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, with Bhima. But in the Mahabharata, it said that eventually he was so strong he had the strength of 10,000 elephants. That's how strong he was.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. I mean,
you know, in Hawaii, there was an incident where one elephant, he went like crazy during a show. There was a visiting circus, and he got mad at his trainer. So there's a video of it, you know. Nobody knew what was going to happen, so they were going to take a video. And then what the elephant did is he got mad at his trainer, so with his trunk, he simply pushed him down with his trunk, and he crushed him. That's how heavy and how strong he was. It was amazing. He didn't, you know, stab him with, you know, a tusk or anything like that. Just with his trunk, he crushed him. Can you imagine how strong
I can relate to that. Yeah, because the one and only time that I was ever in India, we were in Mara, I think, when that the elephant Pushpa, I think its name was. It passed away since then, of course. But I was first time I ever stood this one elephant, and she's a friendly elephant, a lovable, friendly elephant, like a house pet, but still just her size was so huge, and I knew that if her trunk was to swing and knock me over, I'd be seriously hurt. And that's how to play.
Can I jump in here?
Also, you know, there was a... Yeah.
Go ahead, finish.
No, please go right ahead. I already had something to say.
Okay. This is interesting. There's a Mataji recently posted on Facebook that there's a debate going on outside of the devotee community about flat Earth, a possibility of the Earth being flat. And then there's a debate within the devotee community about this. So this verse in past poems, the Lord, in one verse it says he raises the earth up with his tusks, and then he places it on the water with his arms, actually, in another verse. So, you see who's shuffling the papers? Ramananda?
That was me, Prabhu. I'm going to mute myself. I was just moving my phone.
Okay. So, anyway, there's a heated debate, and I didn't mean to get into an argument online. I just plugged in the idea that, I met somebody here recently that was holding that opinion after watching a few YouTube videos, and he anyway, this past time it appears that there's a globe, that Varaha's dealing with a globe. It doesn't say anything about a mandala, about Bhumandal. And I think the part of the thing that the devotees are getting caught up in is they're conflating the two, Bhuloka and Bhumandal. So I think that's the confusion. And Sataputta, who's the inspiration behind the Vedic planetarium, he explains the shape of the earth is round, a globe sphere. And Prabhupada, in different quotes, I gave that some last class, he's also saying like that. And Sridhar Swami, interestingly enough, our commentator, Sridhar Swami, a Bhagavatam commentator, he's saying that the Purana should not contradict astronomy. And there's a Surya Siddhanta and a Siddhanta ceremony which clearly state that the earth is a globe. So, but there's devotees that are very passionate in trying to explain this Bhumandal, and they're conflating it again with Bhuloka. And they're on the world stage. They're building a temple, trying to build the biggest temple in the world. And this is all going to be on the world stage, whatever their presentation is. And, we get into the wonder of wonders. Of course, Yudhisthira's reply was that even though we all see creatures departing for the abode of death every day, somehow we're thinking we're not going to die, or, there's a loophole for us or something. But there's also this other wonder that after a few decades of being connected with this line and Krishna consciousness, some of the devotees think they know everything. It's crazy. Or they're coming at you like that, in a very passionate way. They're so convinced that they have it right, something that's never really been clearly understood, even during Prabhupada's time. Prabhupada challenged the devotees to see if they could figure it out, but there's statements there that it's inconceivable. Prabhupada's given a statement that what Sukadeva is giving in Bhagavatam 5th canto is inconceivable. So in our very philosophy is achintya veda veda tattva. It's inconceivable. There are many things are over our head. We're dealing with the infinite. So it's so part of this flat Earth. I stepped into this without realizing what I was getting into. And one devotee, I'm going to drop his name, Uttama, targeted me just for saying something, and then it just sort of escalated. And then at some point, I had to say I didn't mean to get into an argument, and I told him, you can have the last word, and he did. And he kind of gave me a few shots on the way out about how he debunked most of the things I said. But one of the things that I brought up was, the idea of satellites. So in your presentation, Ramananda, you had the Hubble telescope. So according to Uttama and devotees that are associated with him that are working on this idea, that's a myth. It doesn't exist. There are no satellites. Also, gravity is a myth, according to some of the flat earthers on YouTube. It's about density. Something's denser than air, it stays put. So it gets very convoluted, and I think it's a reaction, almost a blind rage reaction against the scientists, because they're destroying everything. And the scientists are definitely wrong on a lot of things, but I don't think this is the place to attack them. Better to destroy the evolution idea, the atheistic idea that spirit is coming from matter.
I so much like the way Sadhuputta very simply explains that any layman can understand that in the Vedic literatures, the earth, the universe is explained in different ways according to the necessity. So sometimes it would appear it's describing the Bhumandala as being flat, but he was explaining you can talk about a globe as being flat as a planisphere, so that it like lays out. If you just took a sphere like a balloon or something, and then you cut
and they
it,
do that with maps.
Flatten it out.
Yeah.
Then you can say it's a plane at that time.
Right.
It's just another vantage point. It's not that
right.
it's incorrect, but it doesn't mean that it's not a sphere. It just means when you're talking about it in that way, then that's a plane.
But just imagine, so I at one point in the conversation, I say, Prabhu, there are many things that we, in our preaching, that we can give to the general people to help them, to benefit them. And really, at the end of the day, this doesn't have much to do with pure devotion, earth, round, flat, whatever. But, just imagine if, every Harinam party was like into this, and they went out there with signs that the moon landing's a hoax, the earth is flat. They're carrying those signs along with the Maha Mantra. How that would affect the preaching. No response to that?
That does sound pretty
good idea.
preaching, I have to admit. I mean, to be going out there and saying, hey, the moon landing was a hoax, and on and on. And of course, we're not agreeing to the idea of the moon landing ever having happened, but at the same time, if we're going to challenge the status quo of what people believe in, we have to command, first of all, their respect, that they're going to want to hear what we have to say as far as that's concerned. And that, second of all, that means that we have to know what we're talking about, not just because our understanding that the moon landing is a hoax is based on the fact that Prabhupada told us these things. And we go on good faith that what Prabhupada says is Guru Shastra Sadham, therefore absolute truth. But the rest of the world is going on what they believe hard evidence. And it's really, really hard to knock down what someone believes is hard evidence with what you simply believe as being an esoteric truth, an axiomatic truth based on faith. So if someone's going to go out there and start trouble, start a fight, you got to make sure you can win by commanding respect, by having some kind of a standard or status in society that people could, hey, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about, relating to them in terms of what they can use. We have examples of Prabhupada defeating the scientist not because he was a scientist, but because he was a transcendentalist. He was a devotee, a Vaishnava transcendentalist. So we have to understand the proper consciousness that we're going to need if we're going to go out there and do that. Although we're not scientists. Otherwise, we better be scientists. We better be something that people are going to want to listen to what we have to say if we're going to challenge the status quo about what people think really happens.
There's also ways of saying things, and there's ways of presenting things where you don't get into a black and white, or like Ramananda pointed out on Sadhaputa's explanation. Sometimes you see a map where they flattened out the earth and all the continents are all in the oceans where they belong and everything. So the thing to avoid is fanaticism. That's to be avoided like the plague. To be too sure of yourself, or to not have the background to just make outrageous statements and you have nothing to back them up other than faith. That's not going to help. But but there's so many things that you can say that make sense. Like I'm working on an illustrated Gita. There's so many things, and the way I'm going about it is I'm going about it thematically. So I'm starting with, Prabhupada had an expression, in like a needle, out like a plow. So you give them stuff that makes sense, that they can relate to.
Right.
You explain the material world, you explain the senses, the mind, the ego, how we get in trouble, misidentifying with matter, after you establish the soul. And there's, the modes of material nature. There's so many things that make sense that you can present first, and then you get into the esoteric stuff, stuff that they can't reality test with.
Right.
Yes. So it's about the way we present it. And also a little humility, just a modicum of humility helps. That we're not, that we make these absolute statements, and then, they're unassailable, because we said it, or because someone that we respect said it.
Yes, yes. And also, we as devotees in Lord Chaitanya's movement, we have to also always remember that Lord Chaitanya, he didn't talk a lot to the general masses of people. For them, it was Harinam and Prasadam distribution, really. There were only very few souls that he actually engaged in intelligent conversations with, because they were qualified to listen to Lord Chaitanya speak. And this really is the same formula with us when we go out and we preach to people. It's the same exact formula. We have to know who we're talking to and how much they're able to hear.
Right. Karma, just to get people to understand karma, which is it's simple and it's complex at the same time. But a lot of people reject karma. They have motivations. I mean, we're dealing with an atheistic, largely an atheistic world, and they have reasons for avoiding theism. They're vested into some selfish motivation. They don't want to be accountable. They don't want to be checked.
Vidagya, thank you for your contribution and to everybody else and for the encouragement like that. I'm sorry, but I actually have to go. I got an appointment I need to get to.
Already? So soon?
Yep, time to go. So if you don't mind, Prabhu, thank you very much for listening.
No problem.
There we go.
Thank you for class.
There we go.
Thank everyone for the
Jai Prabhu,
comments, and see everybody back here. Who's giving class tomorrow, Ram?
Oh, I have to look. I forgot.
Mukunda.
Oh, Vakunda.
Oh.
Thank you.
Nice.
That's right.
All righty, we'll see everybody back tomorrow. Thank you all.
All right. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.